is spatial justice?
Yes. What is spatial justice? The first time I had ever heard the term was from a Heat Street article I read during the Monkey Stream. Whatever it is, it's the basis for a 5-credit course at UCLA. The description of the concept given in the article sounded so ludicrous, I figured there had to be a better explanation out there. Thankfully, I found a little video that promises to educate me, because I love being educated. So, do tell, what is spatial justice?
Well, iconic examples of justice and injustice are tied to human rights.
So, we're trying to define spatial justice, and iconic examples of justice and injustice are tied to human rights. Well, I suppose that sounds about right. Justice is a human concept, after all, and the redressing of slights or crimes involves a human exchange and assessment. Okay, go on.
And pivotal historical moments, like who is fighting for justice or when has justice been granted to underrepresented groups.
Like who is fighting for justice and when has justice been granted to underrepresented groups? Can justice not be granted to overrepresented groups? I mean, if justice is tied to human rights, it doesn't really matter who the humans are, does it? Underrepresented or otherwise. I'm already getting confused.
But more recently, theorists are turning their attention to where justice is distributed.
Where justice is distributed. So, justice is a quantifiable thing? Because justice in, say, the United States looks a lot different than justice in, say, Iran. Or maybe I'm just getting too abstract here. Okay, distribution of justice. Okay, well, how much does justice weigh, then?
Edward Soja, one of the best-known spatial theorists and a pioneer of spatial justice, writes that location will always have attached to it some degree of relative advantage or disadvantage.
So, if my location is on the river's edge, I'll have an advantage in catching fish versus the guy who is far inland? That kind of advantage? Maybe?
The concept of spatial justice comes from the idea that space cannot be separated from how we experience the world.
Space cannot be separated from how we experience the world. Well, I am moving through three-dimensional space, so... okay, sure. If I am living in the world, I am experiencing space, I guess. Man, this isn't even good sophistry.
It takes a definition of social justice and applies it to geography.
Okay, now we're getting to something a bit more concrete. Spatial justice is the process of applying social justice to geography, the fair distribution of access, resources, and privileges. But there's that word, though. Fair. Who gets to decide what is fair in this theory? And how do you take a plot of land and make that space just using social justice? So, the fair distribution of resources over a geographical area as a matter of justice. Well, I guess you might say, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. That would be a good slogan for this socio-geographical policy, wouldn't it?
So let's look at a couple of examples. No matter where people live, transportation services have an effect on their day-to-day lives.
Agreed.
For example, urban centers have denser transportation networks. And as a result, more food and goods are delivered and a wider variety of amenities are accessible. But transportation can also have negative effects on surrounding communities, since it causes traffic, pollution, road safety issues, and noise.
Right. And that's life in the big city. Outside of having a really popular mass transit system, or buying everyone an electric car, how would spatial justice keep the good and get rid of the bad? And all the same, how is the bad an unjust consequence?
Physical and social infrastructure varies from area to area, even within an urban center. Impoverished neighborhoods may not have as much access to services and transportation networks like bike-sharing initiatives or reliable city transit. With less food diversity and fewer green spaces, some communities transform so-called dead spaces like parking lots into community gardens.
You're telling us how things are. There will always be a variance of quality of life and circumstances from one area to the next based on location, population, and economic factors. This has been true since the beginning of time. So what? And how is this either just or unjust?
Energy grids vary from city to city. The more people there are, the higher the demand and consumption of energy. But on the other hand, small communities receive less energy, even though they are often closer to energy production sites.
Well, if the community is smaller, then they would require less energy than larger populations to operate. Or am I missing something?
And as a result, these rural areas weather the negative effects of byproducts.
The negative effects of byproducts. Byproducts of what? Energy sources? The byproducts of wind farms, like in the animation? What are you talking about?
What about byproducts of industrial production? Electronic waste is exported to lower-income countries, where women and children break it down.
What? Lower-income countries? I thought we were talking about rural communities and energy production. Now we're in lower-income countries where they disassemble used electronics? What?
Or on an environmental level, oil spills and soil contamination caused by production affect surrounding ecosystems.
I am getting a distinct vibe of intersectionality here. But yes, pollution can negatively affect the ecosystem. Waste products from goods and energy production and transportation are the necessary evils of modern life, if and or when they cannot be recycled effectively. And
communities near industrial areas may have less green space because parks, forests, and hiking trails make way for production sites.
They may indeed. But so what?
Consider smaller remote towns whose industry revolves around natural resources. The working population may be more economically vulnerable as they have little job diversity and job security.
They may be more vulnerable, sure. If an area has a limited amount of resources or labor with which to prosper, then the long-term success is going to be more tenuous. Just like it has always been. Just as it always will be. Okay, so far we've had the obvious stated to us, and the implication is that these are problems that spatial justice, I have to assume, can solve, or in some way mitigate. I am really looking forward to getting to the part that explains that.
So now that we have seen some examples of how experience can differ from community to community, what can we do to help increase spatial justice?
Given that you have hardly provided a firm definition of what spatial justice is in the first place, I have no idea whatsoever on how you would increase it. But if you can increase it, then I have to assume that spatial justice is quantifiably measurable. Otherwise, how do you know when there is or is not enough of it?
Well, we can start by localizing food production and supporting small businesses. This will increase local demand and access while decreasing transport traffic.
Localize food production. Okay, so localize food production in the big cities. Somehow. Even if there's far less arable land than in the rural areas. Well, okay, let's just say you can do that. Then those rural communities that used to grow the fruits and vegetables consumed by the big cities have far greater competition in the market and will rapidly become obsolete. The land value in the rural and less urban areas will drop, consequently, and those communities will be forced to move to the urban areas just to survive. Population density will rise in the cities, traffic will increase, and along with that, pollution. And also the energy needs of the big cities will go up as well. And the people running the urban food manufacturing plants will prosper greatly, while the farmers, the people who actually grow the food, will become something of a labor class. And, gosh, my imagination, it runs away with me sometimes. But don't mind me, I'm just trying to think through this proposal logically. Please, continue.
We can localize energy production sites within the areas they are serving.
We can. How? Who will build them? Who will maintain them? How will these power sources be made scalable for growing communities? And, I don't know, if the hydroelectric plant that's 20 miles from a rural community is producing excess power, well, I guess it'll just have to go to waste, right? Energy production has to be localized. And we wouldn't want a smaller community to become dependent on a larger entity for resources they cannot generate on their own. Right?
Right?
We can increase access and opportunity for education, healthcare, and social services, especially for remote and rural communities.
How?
We can build resilience against economic downturn by diversifying job opportunities in small and rural communities.
Diversifying job opportunities in small and rural communities. How? And how did people in big cities, where there was certainly a diversity of job opportunities, how did they fare during the economic downturn of the housing crisis? Were big cities and the people therein just immune from the effects of a bad economy because of the variety of job opportunities?
Our lives and experiences vary from place to place. By encouraging fair distribution of resources like transportation and energy, as well as improving infrastructure and job diversity, we come closer to a spatially just society.
Right. Okay. You have relayed the reality of the modern world in a simplistic fashion. You have envisioned broad, undefined, and whimsical notions of what it would take to resolve the inherent negatives to, well, existing, but you've provided nothing that comes close to being a concrete idea or solution. But if we can somehow localize food and energy, and somehow impart job diversification in areas that don't already possess such diversity, likely because the population and available resources cannot bear the weight of such things, else they would already have them, if only we can somehow make all of that happen, we can encourage spatial justice, which is a thing that is distributive and can be measurably increased, by the way. Oh, and all possible negatives resulting from being alive in the modern world, they are all conditions of injustice. The undirected fallout of human existence is a conscious act of vindictiveness that requires redress. Man, do I feel educated. Alright, well, that was just meant as an introduction to the basics of spatial justice. In my next video, I will attempt to tackle spatial justice in a more substantive way. That is, assuming there is any substance to this theory in the first place. As always, thank you for watching.